Good afternoon and welcome, and thank you so much to End of Life Ireland and the World Federation for inviting me to speak today. As Brendan mentioned, my name is Sarah Kiskadden-Bechtel from the Completed Life Initiative in New York City. There's a lovely Irish phrase, I won't attempt to pronounce it for your benefit, translates as preferable is death to a bitter life, unending sleep to constant illness, which hints at the values inherent within our Right to Die movement, gaining momentum, thankfully, in Ireland and around the world. But let's back up for a moment for some context and considerations. We all know that there are many different terms used to refer to the process of assisted dying, namely voluntary assisted dying, physician-assisted dying, physician-assisted suicide, medical aid in dying, death with dignity, and euthanasia, all of which are terms that have important historical, linguistic, and colloquial connotations. And yet, I believe, and I would argue, that they lack an important unifying framework that would help clarify and help further our movement, which would be an important first step in clarifying these terms for the larger global population in order to further implement assisted dying around the world. So I went down a bit of a rabbit hole in my research, looking at the evolution of terminology. We're all familiar with the term euthanasia from the ancient Greek 2 millennia ago, prefix "eu" plus thanatos, meaning good, plus death. If only it were that simple. We're all familiar with the famous story of Socrates drinking the poison of hemlock. But fast forward 2,000 years, the terrain gets much more complicated and dicey. So beginning in the 1990s, physician-assisted suicide became widely used, especially in the United States, famously with Dr. Timothy Quill, a luminary in the palliative care and end-of-life movement in the States, writing an article, in the New England Journal of Medicine with his patient Diane, whom he helped to die. Moving on, I found this interesting. In California, physician-assisted death pops up at the end of 1992 in a California proposition. By 1994, death with dignity is starting to percolate, beginning in Oregon. Interestingly, medical assistance in dying popped up first in Quebec in 2014, and medical aid in dying popped up in 2016 with Colorado's introduction of the law. And yet both of those laws, as we know, have very different definitions. Yet to the common observer, they're very similar terms. And of course, most recently in 2017, voluntary assisted dying popping up in Victoria, Australia. So taking a step back to a general audience, the distinction of assisted dying is an important one, and it's shifted away from the problematic reference to assisted suicide, especially problematic in a cultural sense in the United States and other countries. No offense to Switzerland, but the shared usage of assisted in the phrase assisted dying is something that I'm reconsidering, and I invite you to reimagine moving forward. So ambiguity persists. The BMJ, or the British Medical Journal, says under the search assisted dying, these definitions are under dispute. No kidding. Proponents and opponents of assisted dying do not all agree on the terminology used to describe this process. Well, tell me more. They helpfully list 3 terms and 3 definitions, all of which add to the confusion and lack the clarifying enhancement that I would hope they would be able to offer. For example, assisted dying, they reference in response to the 2015 bill in England and Wales, but they also add in the legalities in the United States as well as Victoria, Australia. But wait, there's more. Not only 3 terms and 3 definitions, but 9 labels and 19 definitions, thanks to our wonderful colleagues in Belgium. Sarah Moraz and her team have done the heavy lifting of listing out in this wonderful table, which is 3 slides long, of not only the country and the year that assisted dying was legalized in that jurisdiction, but also the legal status combined with the label. I'm not quite clear on how those two are different other than it's more confusing, as well as different definitions for each. So I won't bore you with reading through these, but just for reference, I would say this does not help clarify the movement. It only adds to further confusion and head scratching, which doesn't necessarily move the needle forward. So at the Completed Life Initiative in New York City, where I'm Director of Public Policy and Programming, 2 of my colleagues and I were scratching our heads one day thinking of how we can enhance our public-facing resources on our website to clarify assisted dying for a larger audience. And thinking it through the term medical aid in dying, of course, we started with a U.S. Bias, but thinking through a larger context in a global sense, we realized that we needed to open up our lexicon. So this was our drafting process. I'll spare you trying to decipher it, but we decided on this working definition, namely that choices are available around the world that offer a person the ability to complete or end their life after receiving a diagnosis from a medical provider that impacts their quality or length of life. And so I propose to you that we might consider refining the social contract in the context of the assisted dying movement globally, namely that a person's quality of life as they live their life and approach their death ought to include the freedom to decide how their end-of-life experience unfolds. This decision might be best characterized as a reflection on what makes one's life complete or whole. So turning to Merriam-Webster briefly before I conclude, to really refine the precision of our terms here, to complete or completed as a transitive verb means to bring to an end and mark the end of, or to make whole or perfect, which I believe encapsulates the spirit and intention of our incredible movement here. So in conclusion, I pose a question to all of you. In order to facilitate establishing a universal right to die, might we streamline our terms and identify unifying terminology, namely to encompass these various names and designations associated with this important practice? And might a completed life be the perfect encapsulation of that idea? Thank you very much.